Good evening. I'm John Wensky, Chairperson of the Shrewsbury School Committee, and welcome to our meeting for Wednesday, June 16th, 2021. Tonight's meeting is being broadcast live on Cellcoast Channel 29 and 329 and streamed live on Shrewsbury Media Connections website. Thank you to SAMC Executive Director Mark Serra and Liz Poplowski, as well as SPS IT Director Brian LaRue for their support during these meetings. Tonight's meeting will be rebroadcast between now and our next scheduled meeting for Wednesday, June 23rd. Our first item on the agenda is public participation. Tonight, we don't have anybody that requested to participate in this segment of the meeting. However, in the future, if anybody wishes to participate in the public participation portion of our meeting, they should contact the chairperson prior to the beginning of the meeting. Once recognized, speakers will have up to 3 minutes to present their material. The next item on the agenda is chairpersons and members' reports. Colleagues, anything to report? No. Okay. Next up on the agenda is superintendent's report. Dr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Wensky. Over the past week, we're seeing lots of year-end events happening in our schools, field days, grade 4 move-up celebrations, grade 8 move-up celebrations that have all gone very well. A lot of time and effort put into those by our leadership in the various schools, which we greatly appreciate, and some nice ways to honor our students and have them wrap up the year on a positive note. I did send out a communication to the community yesterday with some links to some virtual concert performances that our Shrewsbury High School band and chorus and orchestra students did, which were quite impressive, as well as a link to this year's spring virtual art festival. Unlike in past years where we would have an art festival typically at Sherwood Middle School, where students and another one at the high school where people could come and the public could come and view the outstanding art our students had created. They have a very substantial slideshow where you can see the quality of the work students created both in person as well as students who are doing artwork virtually from home. So really appreciate the work that our performing arts faculty and our visual arts faculty put into being able to showcase the incredible talents that our students have. And the final piece, I just want to remind in that same communication yesterday, that it is available as a news item on our homepage of our website. I did put out a link to a community and family survey with regard to my performance as superintendent. There's a separate staff survey that went out to staff through the internal channels, and that'll be part of the evaluation of my performance that the school committee will conduct a week from tonight. So I encourage people, if they had a chance, to click on that link and feel free to provide feedback to myself, which I value, as well as to the school committee as you complete my evaluation. And that is that's superintendent's report this evening.
Great, thank you, Dr. Sawyer. The next item on the agenda is a time scheduled appointment, be an update on the school district's response to the pandemic, and we'll give it back to Dr. Sawyer.
Thank you. Again, this will be another brief report this evening, and a very good news story. You can see from what's on the screen that as we look at the number of in-person COVID cases, and really this is in-person or outside, we've had over the last 4 weeks a total of 5 cases. And then this past week was the first time during the school year we had 0 cases. So we continue to see the trend. We're now up to 11 days, consecutive days in the school district without a case of COVID. As mentioned last week, of the cases we've had, it's now, if you can scroll up a little bit, Mr. LaRue, we have a total of 446 cases cumulative over the course of the year in our in-person model, and then of those, only 9 were traced to potential exposure in school. So I want to again commend all the work that our staff did over the course of the year to maintain all of the different protocols to help maintain everything from distancing to masking to cleaning. And it was certainly a team effort, and very pleased that we're ending the school year in a much better place than we were certainly in the middle of the year. And we're hopeful that the end of this pandemic is in sight. Obviously, we'll keep a close eye on things, but was on a call today with the state education commissioner, who once again reiterated that the medical experts that they're working with at the state level indicate that they're expecting essentially a return to normalcy next fall in terms of not needing to distance at lunch, not requiring masks, and even they're even suggesting now this summer that masks are not something that would be required in any of our summer programs based on how things have evolved. So again, it's a good news story. We will put together a final report of our numbers once the school year ends this coming Friday. Friday is the last day of school. So next Wednesday evening, we'll be able to provide you with some final numbers. But that is where we're at. It's a good news story, and I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee has.
All right, thank you, Dr. Sawyer. Colleagues, any questions or comments? No. That's great. Thank you for the report and for the reports every week. It's great to see the trends in the right direction. Hard to believe we're at the end of the school year on Friday. So thank you for all you've done this year and your staff as well. It's really been quite a year. So with that, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, time scheduled appointment, one of my favorites, the Shrewsbury Public Schools staff retirees recognition. 22 staff are ending their education careers with a well-deserved retirement. In combination, they have served the students of Shrewsbury for 472 years. The total represents an average of 21.45 years of service in Shrewsbury and does not include prior educational experience in other districts. So here to present the retirees for Shrewsbury Public Schools is our Executive Director of Human Resources, Barb Malone. Ms. Malone.
Hi, thank you. We decided to do something a little different this year. We weren't sure exactly what tonight would look like in terms of protocol, so we asked our retirees, the ones who were comfortable, to go ahead and put together a video saying goodbye and thank you. And so with Mr. LaRue's support, who's been incredibly supportive this whole year in a myriad of ways, including putting this together, we would like to run the report from our retiring educators.
Many years ago, I left my career in public education to venture out into the private world. And while that private world was very attractive in many ways, I knew that I wanted to return to public education, but only if I found the right fit for me. And 12 years ago, I found that fit here in Shrewsbury, and I knew that I had found the place that I would stay until my retirement, and here we are. There are a bunch of people I want to thank for being part of my career. As the only member of the district-wide leadership team to be retiring this year, I want to first say that the leadership this district has at all levels is truly outstanding, and that starts right at the top with the school committee. Having been the son of someone who served on the school committee for over 20 years, I'm well aware of that commitment that's necessary to serve in this role. So thanks to the school committee members who devote countless hours to our district, and thanks for keeping everyone employed, or nearly everyone employed, during the pandemic. The central office staff of Joe and Barb, Patrick and Jane and Amy and Meg and Brian, again, just truly outstanding. In particular, Dr. Sawyer's leadership over the past decade has been really remarkable, and we're very lucky to have him as part of our community. And of course, the high school leadership team, including all of the directors and my admin colleagues. Again, I sound like a broken record, but just another outstanding bunch of individuals. In the role of the high school administrator, we spend more time with our colleagues than we do with our family on a weekly basis. And quite frankly, I couldn't have asked for a better work family in Todd and Maureen, PJ and Jeff. They are tireless workers, and I've been very proud to be a part of their team. Finally, thanks to all of the Shrewsbury parents who've raised such awesome kids. I've said it many times in the past, but I'll say it again. Anyone who grumbles about teenagers should meet a Shrewsbury teenager, because they're really terrific kids. And that's in large part to the parenting they've had. I have genuinely loved working with your students. Thanks for allowing me to get to know them and to work with them in this manner. I'm forever going to be a Shrewsbury fan, so thank you very much for this experience.
Hello, I'm Pat Broside, and I'm retiring after 33 years with the Shrewsbury Public Schools. Besides being an educator in Shrewsbury, I'm also a Shrewsbury parent because both of my sons have gone through the Shrewsbury Public School system. So I started out as a parent volunteer, and then I became a substitute teacher, a Title I reading and math teacher, a fourth grade teacher, and now I'm leaving as a kindergarten teacher. Tonight I'd like to share part of the letter that I wrote to Dr. Sawyer when I decided to retire. Words can't express how fortunate I feel for the consistent support I've received as I've traveled down my career path in this outstanding district and at this wonderful school. In my years of teaching, I've been so fortunate to have been able to integrate knowledge, life skills, compassion and empathy, a love of learning, and a touch of humor into the lives of many children and their children who have passed through my classroom. As a lifelong learner myself, I've acquired a treasure trove of knowledge, both academic and personal, due to the high standards that Shrewsbury has set for its staff and students, and because of the strong collegiality and caring of the people that I've worked with over the years. So I'd like to thank past and present administrations, school committee members, my colleagues, who I also call my heart family, my students and their parents, who this year I've also called my co-teachers, for the wonderful 33 years that I've had in the district. As I leave, I'm looking forward to my next phase of my life with much excitement. Thank you.
Good evening, school committee members, Dr. Sawyer, Mrs. Plowder, Shrewsbury Public Schools staff, and community members. I'd like to express my sincere thanks for the opportunity to teach in such a great school system with so many great families and wonderful students. I've worked at both Beale and Spring Street schools for over 25 years. I've had many collaborative, supportive colleagues. As you know, teaching is not a job that can be done alone on an island. It takes a village. That includes many supportive and skillful leaders. Brian Mabey, the principal at Spring Street School, has always been available, approachable, and very encouraging over the years. Earlier in my career at Beale School, I was lucky enough to work with Alice Brennan, a skilled, kind, and generous leader. Alice was a creative, developmentally appropriate early childhood expert and an extremely supportive teacher, coach, and principal. I cherish my memories of Alice as a leader and a friend. I'm excited for retirement and planning to spend more time with these two sweet boys, Jackson, who's 3, and Everett, who's 9 months. Give me a you.
Happy retirement.
Thank you. So how lucky am I? It's been a truly unique year, but the collaboration and expertise in Shrewsbury has been phenomenal. Have a great summer, everyone.
In 2001, I was so grateful to Nick DiPilato and Dan Godekans for hiring me. Upon learning that Shrewsbury was home to a Trader Joe's, I felt even more confident that I was in the right place. Over the 20 years in the school counseling department, we ate a lot of cake, and I loved celebrating many We Care events with the school-wide staff. Until this year, cake was also part of orientation for new students, with the new entrant assistance team providing tours, answering questions, and extending a hand in friendship throughout the years. Students loved the opportunity to welcome newcomers and help them feel at home in their new school. I loved working here, sometimes later in the afternoon. As you can see, brilliant sunsets are special perks. No documentation necessary. My home away from home during senior letter writing season was the Shrewsbury Public Library. Connections with friends in this community emerged from activities like Run Club and a pandemic-resistant book club that continued to meet via Zoom, now again in person, thankfully. A year ago this month, Paul, my now husband, and I made a forever plan. We married in October in a delightful ceremony at our home in Ashland. One of the reasons my daughter Rachel and I moved back to Massachusetts was to be close to my parents, and I continue to treasure time spent with family. The spirit of adventure deeply ingrained, my mom and I are setting out on another voyage to Alaska during the first week of school. Sorry. We hope to see real wildlife on our trip. I am grateful for all of my experiences, bitter and sweet, joyous and sad, since it is the blend that makes it all meaningful. Coming from a family of teachers, looking for lessons in everything that happens comes naturally. I appreciate the camaraderie, friendship, and connections. Thanks, Shrewsbury High School, for a great career.
Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Luby from Spring Street School. I want to thank the school committee and the administration for allowing us to recognize those who have made teaching here in Shrewsbury such a memorable experience. There are so many wonderful staff members who each day have made coming to work so much fun at Spring Street School. Mrs. Adair, she is the sunshine that binds us together. Over the years, the teams that I've worked with, Mrs. Telosco, Mrs. Travers, Miss Sam Bernardi, and of course, almost from the very beginning, Miss Doherty and Mrs. Laporto. We all grew together socially and professionally. All those I've worked with from all the rest of the staff at Spring Street School, including Mr. Mike, Mrs. Keogh, and all those fabulous District 4th grade teachers, we've all made an impact on our students' lives. But most of all, I want to thank the students who came through those Team Luby doorways. There was always something we learned from each other, whether it be about World War II, dogs, Harry Potter, or catching fish. Each student brought something unique into my classroom, and everyone left with so much more than we came in with. So I have a few words of wisdom for them. Remember to always love that dog. You don't have to hate that cat. Remember, you are all wonders. Take that curiosity challenge and take those risks. Don't take everything as literally as Amelia Bedelia. Remember to look beyond people's words. Remember that the Red Sox have always been very important. They allowed us to get no homework for 3 days when they reached the American League Series. And of course, no homework for a whole week when they won the World Series. What could be better than that? Remember making Mrs. Luby cry at all those chorus concerts? It was because I couldn't believe how much you had grown up throughout that year. So friends, remember the Owl's Nest is the best place to be. And also our community projects that brought the whole school together. Don't forget to hula dance when you can. We all have such wonderful memories that we've shared together. So friends, you've got this, and always use what you know to get what you don't know. So thank you for being there for me and so many others. I will miss you all, but you will see me around town. Love, Mrs. Luby. Bye.
Hello, my name is Mark Spisto. For the past 28 years, I've been one of the school psychologists here at Shrewsbury High School. I wanted to take a moment to thank the administration for giving me this opportunity. This has been an extremely rewarding job. I will never work with a more talented, dedicated group of coworkers. And so I want to say thank you to the faculty, to the families of Shrewsbury, to the leadership, but most of all to the students. I've enjoyed working with you very much. I am so impressed with the students who come here every day. Their courage, their strength, their resiliency. Thank you. Although I won't be working here, I wanted to say to any student who may be listening, who's concerned for their mental health, or perhaps a friend's, There's lots of people here to talk to. So please find someone. Please talk with one of the nurses, a school counselor, a teacher, a coach, school secretary, custodian. Find someone. People care. People want to help. If school's not in session and you don't know who to talk to, you can always text 741-741, 24 hours a day. Thank you again for this opportunity. I will miss all of you very much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Cheryl Stoichoff, and I'm happy to be here with you tonight. It's difficult for me to believe that so many years have gone by since I began my teaching career here in Shrewsbury, all the way back in 1976. I'm extremely grateful to so many people for the many opportunities and support that I have received throughout the years. Mostly to the many, many parents and students here in town. I do recognize how fortunate I have been to have touched the lives of so many wonderful young people. I remember my years as a student myself in town and the inspiration and guidance that I received during those years. My hope is that I have been able to give back to our youth in a way that has inspired at least a few of them. I will always count my years as an educator here in town among my many blessings. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sue Toke. I've been working at Shrewsbury High School as a special education teacher for the past several years. I want to thank the district in particular, everyone at Shrewsbury High School, and Dr. Sawyer for having been given the opportunity to work at Shrewsbury High School. I know from working in other districts and from doing volunteer work in my own home district of Harvard, Mass for a number of years, how difficult it can be to mediate conflicting interests of all the groups involved, such as parents, unions, the town in general. And so I've always thought that the town of Shrewsbury School District has done a wonderful job of mediating all these interests, and I'm so grateful for having been able to work here. And in this year of COVID, I just wish everybody the best, and thank you.
Hi, my name is Bob Wilson. I've been a teacher for 23 years. 22 of those years have been at Floral Street School as one of their art teachers. One has to admit that this year certainly did present its challenges. It seemed there were learning curves at every step of the way. But I didn't do this alone or unaided. I worked with the elementary art teacher team and my director, Pamela Blank, and it's been a pleasure to work with the best group of teachers I've ever worked with. I also like to give a shout out to my friends, the specialists at Floral Street School, Tracy Martino and Amy Smith, who brightened my day every day with big smiles and wonderful hellos. I also like to thank Dr. Sawyer and my principal, Lisa McCoubry, for leading with such grace. You effected such a positive impact upon me. Also, all the other teachers I've known for 22 years are remarkable. It has been a journey and a pleasure to know you all. Finally, one has to say that the students really are the ones that touch your heart. They taught me more about myself and my profession of teaching than one could ever imagine. I will remember every single one of them. Finally, retirement presents a lot of challenges. What I have learned over the last 22 years will guide me to what I perceive and observe and participate in. Thank you, Floral Street School, for giving me the opportunity to be a teacher here.
Hi, my name is Diane Kelley, and after 18 wonderful years as a para at Beale, I am retiring. To the school committee members and Dr. Sawyer, thank you for your constant hard work and commitment to our school district. Your dedication to the students and staff has made Shrewsbury such a wonderful place to work. I truly have been blessed to be a part of the Beale family, and I would like to thank the educators and staff for making Beale such a fun place to work. I'd like to thank Katie Knott for an amazing 18 years of teaching in her classroom. Katie always saw me as a co-teacher, and that meant the world to me. I was able to tour the new Beale yesterday and questioned my retirement plans a little. Well, just a little. After witnessing firsthand my daughter Madison's experience in the Shrewsbury school system, I know there is no other place I would have rather spent the past 18 years. It has been a privilege and a pleasure to work in such an incredible school district. I wish all the best to everyone, especially those going to the new Beale, and I look forward to visiting. I know this community will continue to put their best foot forward for their students and staff, and I am eager to see the Shrewsbury School District continue to excel in the years to come. A bittersweet final thank you.
Good evening. I'm Rosemarie Royer, and I've been the Patton School Media Aide for 15 years. Never thought this day would come, but here we are. I began as a classroom aide at Spring Street and continued to Patton, where I was subsequently offered the job as media aide. At the time, it felt quite troubling, really, because due to cutbacks, several of the librarians were let go. However, we made the best of the situation, and it's been a pleasure to work with the other media aides in such a collaborative and supportive capacity. During COVID, between us, we've made Google Slides of at least 1,580 books. The great thing is, these are now shared between all elementary media centers, no matter what titles are in each individual library. We've also been urged to weed our collections to make them more current, so I'm pleased to say that our average copyright date at Patton is now 2002. Yay! I'm grateful for our media specialists, first Martha Payne, and then Christy Minton, and finally Pam Santilli, each of whom have plodded between 5 schools and navigated through 5 different libraries, principals, and school cultures. Their guidance and friendship has made our work doable, and I thank them profusely. Pam in particular was very gracious about taking on some of my library work when my teaching classes reached 30. I couldn't have pulled things off without my numerous media volunteers, including parents and former staff, including the great Chris Gustafson, who became my unofficial mentor. Speaking of great role models, I can't thank the staff at Patton enough for the congeniality, support, and friendship these past 22 years. There's always someone to have a chuckle with and a shoulder to cry on. Very grateful for Jane Lazot too. Like the rest of the staff, I'm so thankful that she agreed to return to Patton to save a salary and help us get through a COVID crisis. I shall never forget that Jane kindly joined 4 of my classes during media's Fearless Women Week to speak about her experiences running 24, no less, Boston marathons and showing one of her medals to the students. They were in awe, and rightly so. During the reading of books about Catherine Switzer, who dared to run in the Boston Marathon when it was a men-only race. Thank you to the school administration for your tireless and excellent work on behalf of our children. And I wish you, Joe, and your outstanding family much joy for many years to come. Thank you to the school committee for allowing me to speak and for the amazing work you all do. Good night, everybody.
I'm Joan Sjogren, working for Shrewsbury Public Schools for 14 years. I have a master's in business with a Bachelor of Science in social rehab and a minor in psychology. I started here because of my love of children and the hours available so that I could be present for my own children and their activities. I thank the school committee for giving the children of Shrewsbury a good education. Also thanks to Dr. Sawyer for his support first to my children at Floral, continuing as superintendent of schools. My daughter graduated from Shrewsbury High School, and my son attended Shrewsbury Public Schools through grade 8. Dr. Sawyer has been an incredibly strong, caring advocate for all of the children of Shrewsbury. This last year has been quite trying and emotional, and he has been wonderful to them and to the staff. I thank all of my children's teachers for their caring and teaching over the years. I feel lucky to still be in contact with some, even working in the same building. I thank Mary Lammy, Director of Parker Road Preschool, Alice Brennan and Chris Girardi at Beal, for their support and kindness over the past 14 years. I have worked with wonderful teachers, Jenna, Melissa, Mimi, and Lynn, all with different teaching styles with the love of children in common. For most of my career, I have been at Beal with children I hope to have made a positive impact upon. They certainly have made one on me. It's been a wonderful, supportive place with coworkers that care about each other. I look forward to holding memories close and enjoying some golf, piano playing, and soothing my soul at the ocean. Thank you.
So as we see the rest of the retirees scroll through, as we said before, we had quite a few retirees this year, so I want to thank the ones who did take the time to put together the videos. I really enjoyed the creativity and appreciate the efforts and contributions of all of these individuals to our school system. I don't know if the school committee has any questions, but I'm willing to answer them.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Malone, for the presentation. Colleagues, any comments or questions? No. Oh, Ms. Heffern, sorry.
I mean, it is a different experience this year. Ordinarily, we're speaking to the retirees themselves, so I can only hope that some of them are watching. I think we spent a lot of time in this committee talking about, the percentage of our budget that goes to educators, and it's really, they are the heart of our schools, right? And so that, and it comes across so clearly in those who are retiring, who've spent a long time in our district, and their absolute love of being here. But we couldn't do what we do, and we wouldn't have the successes that we have without them. So it is just a pleasure, and it is a little disappointing they're not here to say that to themselves directly, but I hope they're watching. So thank you again for helping me put this together, Barb.
Yeah, thank you, Barb. That video was outstanding. So kudos to whoever produced it.
Mr. LaRue.
Mr. LaRue, of course, I should have guessed. But 472 collective years of service to Shrewsbury Public Schools. I mean, we know we're a desirable district for both families and teachers to begin and end their career here, as you saw. We attract top talent in the state, and it shows in the dedication from this staff. I wish they could be here to, shake their hands, always something I look forward to, but, I appreciate everyone that put together the videos and just everybody that's put in the time in this district. I would be remiss if I didn't, just mention Greg Nevada. I've always had great respect for in terms of his work at Shrewsbury High School. He's our space planning wizard. I think he's been able to maximize every inch of that school with the work that he's done. Also want to recognize the generations of educators there, Noreen Camerado, and I know her daughter, Kathleen, was a teacher of mine, or a teacher of my kids.
She had a little cameo
Yes.
in the video.
But it is amazing to see the family impact, too, across generations that teach in this district. And I need to end by saying, Cheryl Stoichkov was my second grade teacher at Coolidge School, 37 years of service. That is amazing to see. She was Miss Frangillo to me in second grade. So, but yeah, I appreciate the production. I appreciate everybody's service to the district. It's just outstanding. So
Yeah, we're obviously going to miss them very much, and I also miss seeing them in person.
Yeah, and it really, it's worth noting too. I mean, this has been the most challenging year of their professional careers to end on that note.
And they're still smiling at the
Yeah,
end of it. Go
exactly.
figure.
I know.
Great job.
That's great. Well, thank you, Ms. Malone, for the presentation, and to everybody that's retiring from Shrewsbury Public Schools. Dr. Sawyer, any comments?
Thank you. I also want to just congratulate all of our retirees and thank them for their years of service to the children of Shrewsbury, and also what they provided to their families and to their colleagues. I think that certainly a different way this year, but always appreciate hearing the sincerity around how they feel about having worked in this particular school district. And I think it's a tribute to the whole school community that we do have educators and support staff who stay with us for many years. We do not see a lot of turnover, which is a signal that they are feeling good about their role and being supported in it. And I do feel that it really is, as Ms. Heffernan said, the staff are the heart of our what we're able to do for students. So really appreciate everything that they've done, particularly this past year and their last year with us. And we wish them much health and happiness as they move on to the next chapter in their lives. It really is remarkable when you think about the amount of expertise that they've brought over so many years to our school district, and we really deeply appreciate that. Want to thank Ms. Malone for making sure that they were properly honored this year, Mr. LaRue for helping us put together that video piece. I will be spending some time over the next day and a half getting out to schools. We typically when they come and shake hands, they get a token of appreciation from the district, and we'll make sure that folks get those out in the buildings over the next couple of days. So I look forward to being able to see them in person and be able to deliver that token again of the community's appreciation for all their service to Shrewsbury. So thank you for the opportunity to honor them, and again, congratulations to all of our retirees.
All right, thank you, Dr. Sawyer. Thank you, Barb.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, the next.
Mr. Winsky, could I make a suggestion? I know that the next group, someone was not going to be able to join us until 7:45.
Okay.
So if I might suggest we take the agenda out of order.
Sure.
And have Mr. Collins, if he's prepared, to be able to present the year-end budget report. Sure. As it'll take probably about the amount of time, about 10 minutes, and then we'll be able to get these other folks online to get to that next piece. If that's okay
Yeah,
with
that's
you
fine.
as the chair.
Yep. So Mr. Collins will provide a final update on the FY21 budget status, and the report was enclosed in our packet. Mr. Collins, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Winsky. So I'll provide some highlights and a little bit more detail with respect to the year-end projection for fiscal '21. I just want to hit upon a few topic areas in summary at first. Of course, as we all know that fiscal '21 this year was a very different year with respect to how we operated, with many things that were not anticipated when the budget was set, and also changing frequently during the course of the year. The report that I'm going to provide to you tonight is with respect to our town meeting appropriation for fiscal '21, which is $67,995,283. It was, when approved by town meeting, a 2.55% increase over last fiscal year, fiscal '20. At this point, I want to convey to the school committee and to the community that we will fully expend our town meeting appropriation. Obviously, we're not facing a deficit situation, which is good, and what has certainly helped with that is the second topic, which is COVID funding. Both federal and state level COVID-related funding, whether you call it stimulus or whatnot, all of this additional funding that came into all school districts universally across the nation and across the Commonwealth through different types of formulas and allocations certainly helped us cover costs that were unanticipated for some of the things that we reported to the school committee previously, like additional staffing for cleaning during the daytime, tents for spaces where we needed to expand our cafeteria service, for example, at Oak and Patton School, COVID surveillance testing of all of our staff and students, and all of those types of activities were covered, not entirely, but significantly by COVID-related funding. I provided a report to you on March 24th about the use of those federal and state COVID-related funds. Of course, we just are in the midst of receiving yet another bucket, if you will, so-called ESSER III federal stimulus funding. It's in the order of about $1.2 million. We need to make plans that need to be approved by the Department of Education for the use of those funds by early fall. What we'll plan to do is provide another update to the school community, school committee and community at large with more details, again, as a follow-up to that March report on the use of that COVID-related funding. In terms of our general fund or town meeting appropriated budget, you know, you have the spreadsheet here, which kind of breaks down the nearly $68 million into various categories. And there are 19 different kind of general buckets of, if you will, of funding. And I'm going to just highlight a few of those where our, what we had budgeted in our projected year-end expenditure is going to vary by 10% or more. And some of those categories, for example, would be on the spreadsheet referred to as A5 or substitutes, day-to-day substitute and long-term substitutes. So by year end, it's projected that will be approximately 38% under budget. And that is a function, you know, substantially with respect to, we had 15 school days when we were not physically in session at all. And so we therefore didn't need any substitute teachers to cover for teacher absences. There were also periods of time where it was difficult to get substitute teachers when we did need them in the kind of height of the pandemic. So we are running significantly under budget, almost ironically, if you will, with respect to day-to-day and long-term substitute teachers. The next category is categorized as employee benefits. It's you know, a relatively, in the context of the $68 million budget, it's a relatively small bucket, about just under $400,000, but we're running about 12% under. And one of the reasons there is that's the line item where we provide for, by contract, tuition reimbursement to staff, teaching staff who are advancing a degree. I think because of the pandemic, many fewer staff chose to enroll in graduate level courses, as you might understand, and so we're running under budget in that particular category. The next category, B2, special education transportation, projected to be 38% under. We were able to cover our summer special education busing costs last summer with some grant funding instead of using our general fund appropriation. Of course, that was a program that had many fewer students as well because we were kind of in the midst of the pandemic. We also had lesser than expected out-of-district transportation costs and also lesser costs for bus monitors, again, because we had fewer in-session school days. Special education tuitions, I'll talk a little bit more, but in terms of kind of where we budgeted and with the assumption of using $4.2 million in state circuit breaker reimbursement funding, we're running about 10% under on a base of nearly $7 million in total special education tuition costs. So I think that's pretty good budgeting by the special education department in an area that has typically high volatility. It's kind of difficult to anticipate, you know, a year and a half in advance about specific placements. Educational contract services, we're running under budget, approximately 32%. Again, a couple of reasons there. The provision of special education independent contractor services, also lesser than normal graduation expenses. Of course, we had a beautiful outdoor ceremony on our turf field, but did not have rental costs for DCU nor Mechanics Hall. And we also had fewer contractors for the summer special education program, again, last summer. Textbooks, curriculum materials, and instructional equipment, we're running over budget, projected to be 32%. This is one area where, you know, from reopening plans, if you will, in the springtime, we procured a large number of student furnishings to provide for adequate student social distancing, where in, you know, a lot of classrooms we had tables where kids were congregated closely. We need to pull those out of schools and then replace that with individual student desks and chairs. A lot of those costs were covered by COVID grants, but not entirely, so we used some general fund budget money for that. The next category, D4, professional development. You know, typically that's a category where we would expend money to fund expenses for staff, teaching staff, administrators, specialist staff to attend conferences and further their education. Of course, all that went away. So there weren't really many in-person, hardly any in-person conferences, and there was lots of Zoom meetings, but we had fewer expenses there, and of course, none of the travel-related expenses that come with it. Some of those monies were shifted to additional educational supplies and materials on a kind of K through 12 basis. Again, some of that was covered by grants and some of it was not. And so we projected to be about 12% over budget there. Category D6, other miscellaneous, towards year end, knowing that we were looking at a positive situation, working with Mr. LaRue. This is a multi-year effort to continue to work on security and safety in our school buildings. And a couple of projects that have been in abeyance or deferred for a while was the upgrade of the Sherwood public address system. So we're moving ahead with that, along with the installation of alarm light strobes at the high school. So while we have the technology to literally press a button in the principal's office or front office secretary and put an entire school into lockdown, that's done typically through the PA system, which is an audible alert, telling people through a recorded message that they need to go into a lockdown situation. The problem is at the high school, we have very large spaces like the commons during lunchtime. You can't always hear those things, so we're installing light strobes as a visual signal to alert people about that as well. So that category unto itself will be over budget. And then finally, the last category, utilities and telephone, will be about 46% under budget there. We had previously some capital costs that the telephone switch itself was replaced, and so we didn't need to carry that leasing cost this year. And we've adjusted the budget for fiscal '22, which is already approved, to kind of lower that budget going forward. So in terms of where we're at, again, we're going to fully expend our appropriation. Had all things kind of being equal, if you will, we'd be operating with a positive variance of approximately $834,000, which is 1.2% of our general fund appropriation. So what this allows us to do, actually, and it's a very positive story, is to use less circuit breaker funding, which is a separate fund, than expected. We had planned to use about $4.2 million. We can use less there, which will be able to reserve that circuit breaker funding for future special education costs in future years. What this does is two things. It provides a greater degree of certainty regarding the fiscal '23 circuit breaker revenue budget, because we're not waiting for the state legislature. That whole cycle doesn't work for us. We prepare our budget in December to present to you in January. The state hasn't even taken up next year's budget. So having more funding in that account lowers our risk of me misforecasting what that revenue source might be. So it provides greater budgeting stability. And then it also, secondly, provides a greater mid-year budget stability and resiliency when we do face those unexpected special education costs. We can carry up to 1 year's worth of circuit breaker funding in that fund. And I'm projecting right now, with the results we have here, that we would carry about 81% of that amount, or $2.4 million. So that is kind of a summary. Of course, it is a complex financial system with multiple sources of funds between grants, tuitions and fees that parents pay. Many of those were waived this year. We had considered, expected that some of those revenue sources would be going down. Some of them went completely blank because of the way events transpired. And so we had some lesser revenue there. But the short story is that we're in a positive situation with the fiscal '21 budget, and will set us up for stability going into fiscal '22 and '23 and beyond. So the recommendation is, as traditional requirement is to allow us, for you to take a vote to allow us to make kind of those line item transfers that are reflective in this summary report here, where we're over and under, to bring the general fund appropriation to zero, knowing full well that it will increase our circuit breaker funding going forward in that particular account. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Colleagues, any questions or comments? Dr. McGee?
Just curious about the cost overrun for teachers. Percentage-wise, it's one of the smaller things, but absolute number-wise, it's the largest. Do you
Sure.
have some sense as to what sort of drivers there would be to push us in that direction during COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, and that's a good question, of course. So, going to different modalities of providing education in the fall, we had both a hybrid model, and then we had a remote teaching model where we had, I think it was probably a district-wide, maybe about 30% students were in the remote modality. And of course, that didn't break out evenly by grade level or the courses that we needed to provide education to those students. So we needed to hire additional teachers to cover those remote classes. And some of those classes, and even in-district classes, had much smaller class sizes as a result as well. So it's really a function of hiring additional teachers to cover the different educational modalities. The other contributing part is that while I had forecast that we would have a decrease in tuition revenue for full-day kindergarten, it was eliminated completely. So we needed to cover that revenue source with the general fund. So those would be kind of the two major contributing factors there.
Thanks a lot.
Further comments, Mr. Palich?
Just my compliments to Mr. Collins. Given the level of volatility that we experienced this year, I do think a 1.2% variance is astounding in terms of accuracy. So thank you for your work, and I do support the recommendation before us.
Great, thank you. Ms. Fritz?
If you could just comment on the ESSER III funds and the how the restrictions on those as compared to 1 and 2?
The ESSER III funding is the most bureaucratic grant funding application that I've ever seen come from the Department of Education. It is federal funding. It is much needed. It is welcome, and will provide many benefits for our students in Shrewsbury for the upcoming 3 basically calendar years is that we have to spend it. So it's not as if we need to spend this $1.2 million right away. We need to spread it out to help students regain the lost learning that they had. But it is incredible in terms of the level of effort and the level of detail that we need to describe to them about how we're going to spend the money. And it is required that the superintendent of each school district, Dr. Sawyer in this case, needs to verify that our plan for the use of that $1.2 million has been shared and received feedback from the school committee, our local unions, parent community, students, faculty, and alike. And then also, whatever plans that we do put into place in order to recover the lost learning, those methods need to be measurable. And so we need to provide the, if you will, what the input was. So say, for example, providing an academic learning program in the summertime, what we did, and have pre-program and post-program measurement of those outcomes. So they want to see the educational outcomes connected to the financial inputs. And, I'm sure that most folks would say that that is a very good idea. In some cases, it's difficult to achieve. But it is just absolutely incredible. And is very much unlike ESSER I and ESSER II, which was very much along the lines of, we're going to send you some money quickly. We know you've got these new costs. And they had allowable uses, a category of allowable uses and a category of unallowable uses. And it was pretty straightforward going forward.
Right.
But this is very different.
There's a check and a balance, and we will be required to prove each part of that as we go along.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Ms. Heffernan?
Yeah, I also, similar to Mr. Palich, want to just note of our 19 line items, the number of which are impacted by COVID, more than half. And so in such a volatile year, the idea that your office was able to come forward with a budget last August, which we remember last August, the things that we didn't know then, and that our variances, a meager 1.2%, I think really speaks to your skills and what you know about our district. I also would just say, given our recent override and what we're trying to do to stabilize our budgets going forward, I think it is absolutely fiscally prudent to hold the vast majority of those funds in the in the circuit breaker, which is historically one of our more volatile line items, and so that just seems quite fitting and appropriate, and appreciate all of the efforts to get us to this place through this quite crazy and tumultuous year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the report, Mr. Collins. I think this is how you close the playbook on managing school finances during a pandemic. A lot of moving parts here. When you consider remote learning, hybrid, in-person, moving desks out, moving desks in, just constant change throughout the year. And you mentioned a few things. I know it was stated about COVID funding and ESSER funding, that one-time restricted use that we've heard throughout the year, strict limitations. And also through Ms. Malone and her reports with HR, the challenges around substitute teachers. So there's no surprise that there's some volatility there, special education tuitions, high volatility. Overall, it's a good news story, I think. All things considered, it's just been quite a year, and I want to thank you and your team for everything you've done to land the plane here. So
Definitely a team effort from the business office and the central office team and all of our building principals as well to keep it all together.
Absolutely. It's a lot of work behind the scenes, so thank you so much. Dr. Sawyer, any comments?
The school committee knows that I believe that Mr. Collins is the best in the business, and we're very fortunate to have his leadership and the team's leadership in order to make this work for us this year. The fact that we're able to land the year without a deficit, and to be able to maintain stability in our where we were really taking a very large risk with our special education circuit breaker as of last August, because to avoid even more drastic cuts than what we implemented this year. And so this really, I think, is again puts us on solid ground. It doesn't, there's a lot of ground to make up from the cuts we made this year. We're very grateful, of course, that the community supported us with the recent override that gives us stability, and this will underscore that as well. But thank you to Mr. Collins for his leadership, and do recommend that the school committee vote so that we can make those transfers and zero out the budget for this year.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, this requires a committee vote. So I need a motion to authorize the administration to make budget transfers from the original budget plan as necessary to eliminate deficits and surpluses with the intent of fully expending the total FY21 appropriation by June 30th, 2021, and balancing all accounts. Can I have a motion?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Thanks very much.
And Ms. Winsky, I am told that all of our guests are online now, so we can move
Okay.
forward to that agenda item.
Great. All right. Well, the next item on our agenda is a time-scheduled appointment. It is regarding Native American perspectives on the Shrewsbury High School mascot. Colleagues, as you recall from last week's reports, the SHS Mascot Ad Hoc Study Group indicated that despite outreach, it had been unable to make a connection with any Native American groups to discuss these perspectives regarding the debate about the SHS nickname and mascot, the Colonials. After additional outreach, 3 Native American representatives who are members of the Massachusetts Mascot Coalition Steering Committee have agreed to speak with the school committee tonight regarding this topic. And I'd like to welcome our guests. Dr. Sawyer, if you want to.
Sure, and as they come online here, we're joined this evening by Melissa Ferretti, who is the president, chairlady of the Herring Pond Wampanoag Tribe, by Rhonda Anderson, who is the Western Mass Commissioner of Indian Affairs and the co-founder and director of the Okitu Cultural Center, and Brittany Wally, who is a Nipmuc Tribal Anti-Mascot Coalition representative. And Mr. LaRue will try to bring them online to the screen here, and we will welcome them. I know they've prepared some remarks, and then they'll have an opportunity for the school committee members to ask questions as well.
Thank you.
Great. They're online here. We'll just video up here 1 second. Sorry for the delay.
No worries. All right. All right. Welcome. Want to introduce yourself? Go around the windows on the screen.
So first on the top left, we have Melissa Ferretti.
Wanina Khan, actually, I'm still in the early today. Natasuvis, Melissa Ferretti, New Tomas, Sikwana Makopakwit, Khan Tai Patuxit. What I said to you in my language is good evening. My name is Melissa Ferretti. I am from the Herring Pond tribe of Plymouth and Bourndale. I'm just going to start, or are we going to go around and do introductions first and then we do our speeches, or are we going to just get right into it?
Yeah, you can introduce, if you want to go around, yeah.
So next we have Rhonda.
Pagalagisi, Anupakshinaga Olak, Tanukshinnaga Rhonda Anderson, Pangmakpak no Uranga Koenami, Shamaktunga, Western Massachusetts Commissioner on Indian Affairs and me. So Koyanak Nalag Nagipsi, Shrewsbury Miet. I said to you in my language, I'm Anupiak. My Anupiak name is Alak. My white name is Rhonda Anderson. I live in Coleraine, Massachusetts, and I'm the Western Massachusetts Commissioner on Indian Affairs and the founder and co-director of Okateo Cultural Center. Thank you very much for listening.
Brittany Piai Winnipeg Wally. Hello, my name is Brittany Littleleaf Wally, and to give you some context about myself, I am a Nipmuc tribal member, anti-mascot representative. I work together both with Rhonda and Melissa on mascot steering coalition issues, and on the State Flag and Seal Commission as well I'm on. Previously I've worked at both Plymouth museums, and I've worked in the community as a martial artist, instructing students from the surrounding towns. My grandparents both retired in Shrewsbury. My mom grew up in Sudbury. My dad grew up in Worcester. And currently I work at the Concord Museum. So it's a little bit about myself, and I did want to express some excitement and some hardness in seeing that we have a seat at your table tonight. Kadabadamesh. Thank you.
Okay. The floor is yours. Go ahead.
Am I going first? Is that the... All right. So, first I'd like to echo what Brittany said. Thank you for having us here tonight. It's really great to be able to come to you and share this space and talk a little bit about your theme and your mascot, the Colonials. Before we discuss the negative and harmful impacts of these Native American mascots and themes, I'd like to just first share with you some brief definitions from an English dictionary. Colony is a group of people who create a settlement in a distant land. Okay, colonialism, the policy or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country, occupying it with settlers, and exploiting it economically. There are at least 12 forms of colonialism. The ones we're all most familiar with is settler and exploitive colonialism, which is defined as the large numbers of settlers that claim the land and become the majority, employing a logic of elimination. As Patrick Wolf put in the American Historical Review, they attempt to engineer the disappearance of the original inhabitants everywhere except in nostalgia. Based on historical precedent and biblical principles and the natural law, the colonists believed that their rights were inalienable and they sought religious freedom. Yet they denied these very same rights to the original inhabitants of this land, the first peoples of this region. We know I'm not here to give you dictionary or a history lesson. Let's be frank here. The history of colonialism is one of brutal subjugation of all indigenous peoples of this region and what we refer to as Turtle Island. I am a herring pond Wampanoag mother and grandmother, raised by an elder of my tribe in Cedarville, a small village in the town of Plymouth. I have lived on my homeland all my life. Growing up in the town of Plymouth, America's hometown, and educated in what was then called Plymouth Carver School District, the colonists and the Mayflower were certainly celebrated in our town. In school, we were taught of the romanticized Thanksgiving story. We were likely dressed up as pilgrims and Indians with paper hats and turkeys and feathers. Most often, the story that I remember focused on the brave and noble pilgrims whose 66-day voyage across the Atlantic to the New World helped build what is now America. Don't get me wrong, I love my country, as do the many Indigenous United States veterans that have fought and died in our wars. Oftentimes, in the earlier days of the fighting, not because they supported colonialism or colonists, but because they were trying to survive and retain their land. As a matter of fact, American Indian and Alaskan Native people serve in the United States Armed Services at a higher rate than any other group. I'm a proud Native, I'm a proud American, but a colonist I am. As a tribal community, we also know well that there is little knowledge of the actual history and contemporary existence of tribal communities in the region. I know about the racism faced by my ancestors, my tribal community, and members of my family, myself. The fact that racist ideas about Native peoples in Massachusetts are deeply ingrained and are reflected in sports teams' mascots should not have to be explained in 2021, especially since Native people, Native activists, and educators throughout the United States have fought for decades to bring an end to these harmful Indian mascots. But here we are today. I feel very redundant as I've said this speech way more times than I should have by now. The blatant and destructive racism of such images as sports teams' mascots. First and foremost, such images, symbols are deeply offensive and racist, and they're harmful to the well-being of Indigenous peoples, and especially to our youth. In my tenure as tribal chairwoman, I have worked tirelessly to educate the public, non-natives and natives alike, about the Herring Pond tribe and its rich, well-documented history in the town of Plymouth, Barnstable counties, and the Commonwealth as a whole. As a tribe located at the ground zero of colonization, I know very well Indigenous people in New England are often overlooked or ignored. There's a long history of erasing, ignoring, and trying to silence Native people in the United States. This is part of the racism faced by tribal citizens in New England, the racism that says that we don't exist and that we should have no voice in matters that directly affect our lives, our rights, and our lands, like mascots. The truth is, growing up in America's hometown, I felt invisible in my school system. Native people as a whole feel invisible and often dismissed. We're constantly having to validate our existence, explain who we are, where we're from, something that could have been explained in a classroom if only Native American education and Indigenous studies was considered a necessary part of your curriculum. These images of Indianness have been part of the Euro-American mindset for 500 years. 500 years. And its justification of violence and racism directed specifically at Indigenous people. Sports team mascots are part of the colonial project of erasing our Native identities and silencing our Native accounts of our own history. And they suggest that colonization of Native people in this region was inevitable and necessary. We have never been silent, and we continue to resist colonialism and racism. that is aimed at our Native peoples. There are no sports team, mascots, or themes that do honor to our tribal identity and history, or to that of any other tribal identities and histories. Mascots and themes do not make Euro-American sports fans want to go to the library to read the work of brilliant Native authors, or to learn about Native people, Native history, and the theft of Native homelands, and the enslavement and murder of Native people in colonial New England, or to learn about the racism and genocidal impacts of U.S. Indian policy. They do none of these. And promoting the notion that it is okay and just harmless fun to reduce Indigenous people to stereotyped images or characters is just ridiculous. Like tribal nations throughout the United States today, the Herring Pond Wampanoag tribe still faces these destructive impacts of colonialism. And along with other tribal nations in the United States, we are very proud and immensely proud of our history of resilience. And as a Native people who have retained our deep connection to our homeland, please think long and hard as to what message your town wants to send to its students and its future generations. Do you really want your children to look up to or be like colonists? Katapatash, thank you so much.
Okay. So before I continue, I would like to acknowledge the land that I am a guest on. The land that I'm speaking from is Sokoke Abenaki and Pecumtuck traditional homelands here in Coleraine, Massachusetts. Tribes that are currently still here in this area are Nipmuc, Mohican with an office in Williamstown, and Abenaki in southern Vermont. So thank you so much for listening, Shrewsbury School Committee and community. Again, I echo from Brittany and Melissa. I really appreciate being asked to talk here tonight to shed some light on an Indigenous point of view, a point of view that is often left out of the conversation. So this is a first for me tonight to be talking about a settler colonial mascot. So, you know, I'm a longtime activist on removing Native mascots, and as well, I'm a mother and alum of a child in a district with a Native mascot, Warriors. You know, and mascots have a strong impact. You know, I do not have my child go to that local high school because I don't want her to have those same issues with a mascot that I grew up with. So instead, you know, I've proudly cheered on our daughter and our friends. We've cheered them on as aardvarks and otters, right? So we're going to be proud of our children and cheer them on no matter what. So I'd like to hang on to that thought as we're having these conversations. And I see that your community has been subject to some really hostile and divisive, really a divisive environment. When you're attempting to have conversations about this mascot or moniker, and it's so hostile, in fact, that the safety of your children is at stake. You know, I can relate as a Native woman. I've personally found it to be dangerous to be speaking up for change, right? And like other Native activists, we've been subject to verbal harassment and threats of rape, death, violence. You know, it's pretty horrific. And is this what you want as a mascot, right? Do you want division, vitriol, hatred? So what are you celebrating here? And what part of history is being honored and lifted, and to whose expense, right? So how can one cheer on your children knowing what that moniker represents to marginalized, colonized communities? So I was reading your report, and I saw this quote in your ad hoc study group on the colonial moniker, and it bears repeating. Acknowledging our own individual roles and culpability in our settler colonialist society hurts. But what is worse is denying this fact. And when we don't see that, we can't see the real impact of our actions, right? By Amanda Morris, What is Settler Colonialism? And from looking at that study, like your community is primarily white and not subject to seeing or feeling. Therefore, it warrants additional care and understanding how intention versus harm comes into the conversation regarding your moniker. We as Indigenous people deal with intergenerational and historical traumas, right? These are cumulative traumas from multiple generations of families facing pandemics, displacement, policies of intentional genocide and warfare, intentional cultural genocide, and generations of our children being removed from homes and placed in residential schools or foster care systems. Right? These traumas are still felt today in our communities and families. We still face the effects of colonialism, right? An excellent example of colonization is not telling the full story of land theft and genocide, as Melissa stated, but rather myths like Thanksgiving. So know and understand that colonization is not a historical action, but an ongoing process, right? So I firmly believe that educational systems should be one that upholds morals and mentors for our children on how to be present in this world. And it is important to understand that learning history from a colonizer lens does not shed light on all facets of history. And this is sort of a classic example of picking and choosing history to elicit good feelings of nationalism. So we need to be teaching accurate historical actions that offer a point of view that is invisibilized by mainstream society. And to borrow words from a good Nipmuc friend, schools that teach that Native Americans were always taught in a historical sense, we were hapless bystanders benefiting from white proximity. That's not acceptable. And a colonist moniker is not an educationally sound teaching model either. So even George Washington University recognizes this fact and is taking action by slowly replacing the colonial name. So I humbly ask that you vote to replace the colonial moniker, being on the right side of history. And you're not going to be losing identity. You will not be losing memories, but instead you'll gain community spirit, community cooperation, and coming together to create a new mascot or name, a new name that everyone can truly be proud to stand behind, right? So remember, we're always going to be proud of our children, even if they're aardvarks and otters. So Koya Naknalag Nagivsi, thank you for listening.
Hello again. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So I have some remarks prepared, and then I have an image that I would like to screen share. So that'll be a little bit later, and I can let you know if that's all right. If not, I can read a little bit of the text that's in the image. So, like I said, my name is Brittany, and I am Nipmuc. And I am truly heartened to be able to speak tonight. It's very special seeing as your community sits in my traditional homelands. Usually, like I mentioned, I serve as the Nipmuc anti-massacre representative, but that's in order, as said before, to illuminate the empirical and anecdotal evidence that shows the harm of native mascots and eliminate them. However, this is clearly not the case, and It's interesting because your desire to have Native representatives tonight indicates that members of your community know there's a problem with glorifying colonization. However, the fact that we have to meet tells me that others are not yet clear on just how harmful such a practice is. So, like I mentioned, daily in my professional life, I have described accurate accounts of how lifeways were in the colonial times for colonists. And as I'm sure you know, colonial life in the 17th century was not something that was truly romantic. Leaving Europe late, the Mayflower's mast breaking, arriving in the wrong destination, spending a harsh winter on the ship that resulted in exhaustion of food supplies, and then ultimately a 50% death toll is not romantic. And we haven't even gotten to the history of my ancestors. Surviving their first year largely in part due to Native people. It's not necessarily romantic, and let us not forget that from the 1620s to the dissolving of Plymouth Colony, which was about the end of the century, Plymouth Colony had displayed the head of Wittawamut, a Native person who was killed by Miles Standish. And the point is, when we think about colonial life, we often miss these very raw details. And it's not uncommon, truly not uncommon for me to learn about one of my Native ancestors or someone who fought for Native rights, to learn about them and then learn that their head was also displayed on a pike in a colony. That is raw. That is not romantic. Now, these times are not romantic for my ancestors either. The genocide led by colonists included historic aspects of violence, land theft, and deadly diseases. However, colonization, colonial mindsets, and Native people are not things of the past. I'm still here today, of course, so I'm a contemporary person. Colonization is still a contemporary issue, as mentioned before by my colleagues. Let us remember, too, that right now, although Native people have been aware that in residential schools, there were missing children. Where did they go? And now more and more news is finally officially coming out that there are these mass graves of children who are forced to go to residential schools that are now being discovered. And also let us remember that, of course, these schools closed in the 90s, the 1990s. Those that survived are still alive today, their grandparents. Another form of colonization that is alive and well today is the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And now there are pipelines that run through or are planned to run through sovereign Native land, such as the current Line 3 in Minnesota. Another form of present-day colonization is when Native leaders get put into jail and prison for standing up for their land and these pipelines that run through them. That's modern colonization. That is the same thing, just in a different form. And it should go without saying that the people who spilled out of Sudbury and into Shrewsbury to establish the town colonized that land and removed my ancestors from it. So modern colonization is me walking through that town and not having access to my own ancestral lands. And also, just to remind us too, how did some of this happen? I'm sure you're very familiar with Lake Quinsigamond. The lands around it, the lands around a lake would be quite fertile to plant in, and there was colonization happening. There was encroachment on that land until it was taken over. At the bottom of Lake Quinsigamond are Mishunash, long wooden, burnt-out boats that my ancestors made. And modern colonization is the pollution in the lake that's destroying them. So I really believe that proper education on these things, these hard things, right? Proper education can help us understand what colonization was. And I think when we really truly appreciate that, we're able to divorce ourselves from the romanticization of it. It's just not a healthy thing to do. But I also can't help but notice all of the artifacts surrounding me day to day at the Concord Museum of the Revolutionary War. And I also believe that war is not something to be romanticized. Every day when I pass by these different things, I pass by a smashed mirror. And I think about the violence, right? I pass by a beam of a bridge that was burned. I pass by the actual guns that were used. War is not something to be romanticized. And I want us to consider one other thing when we think about who was in this war, who fought in this war. Now, colonists, right? Colonists fought in the war, but this group of people that we are thinking of fighting against the British, right? The colonists actually had a deeply British identity. They didn't see themselves as Americans yet. They didn't see themselves as colonists. They had a deeply English, British identity, right? And they were fighting in this war, but who else? When they're fighting for their freedoms, it seems very hypocritical to enlist your slaves. Other people of color, right? So maybe a freed slave who does not have the ability to own land. They might have been fighting in the war in hopes that they could achieve the ability to own land. And Native people who fought on both sides, right? Because some Native people fought against these colonists because they didn't want them there. So to say that this group, right, to say it was the colonists and the British is an oversimplification that is detrimental to our understanding of history, whether you're Native or not Native, right? So that's very important. I'd like to just read an excerpt from nps.gov. Patriots of Color is the page. Between 20 and 40 colonists of the approximately 4,000 who fought along Battle Road on April 19th, 1775, were of African descent or Native American. Although excluded from required militia service prior to the war, these individuals of color were the first of many to take up arms between 1775 and 1783. By the end of this conflict, an estimated 5,500 African and Native American men served on the colonial side. Many more served on the side of the British, particularly after the fighting moved south. So that is something where even if you truly desire to bring this war and these groups of people of your sports, it's still not accurate to call yourselves the colonials. And I do have an image I would like to share, if that's possible, of something that is displayed in the museum that I work at. It's called Unheard Voices. And I'm just trying to make sure that we can view the image okay. Just because it just decided to freeze on my screen. So these unheard voices, it's talking about these folks that I'm mentioning. And again, I think it would be quite difficult to say that these unheard voices were truly of colonists. You know, if you are being forced to fight in a war because you belong to someone, you're not a colonist. You're not a colonial. So may I share my screen at this time?
Yes, yes, you may.
Okay. Okay, I'm just going to do my screen and then I'll click over so you won't have to see our faces next to our faces. So, right here we have unheard voices. Is that clear to see? Is that okay?
Yes, yep.
Okay, so we can see it. I won't read the whole entire thing, but it really is part of what the museum is trying to show. And I know that a lot of museums today are working very hard to show accurate descriptions of history and not a romanticized version. And this museum is very, very close to where you are. So maybe that could be something that your community does to help move yourselves forward. So what I'd like to do actually is bring your attention to this this payroll list of men who were enlisted, and as you can see in this caption, 3 enslaved men were among their number. Can you find their entries? Now, it takes a good eye, an expert's eye, to be able to find just who they are and where they are. However, if you start looking, you see these different things noted, right? Different things noted. And there's a few that when you go through, there's actually an apostrophe indicating the possession of this person. So, if we have right here in front of us, right, we cannot deny that this is an example of enslaved men who are in a war to fight for their freedom. Whose freedom? Just the colonists' freedom? They're not the only ones fighting in this war, though, right? Just to really exemplify that we can do better. We can do a whole lot better. All right. So, I truly hope, I really do, that volunteering my time tonight and speaking on these things helps clarify why I support your community in seeking out ways to better itself. There are countless ways to step forward together and how to benefit the next 7 generations in a good way. So I thank you for your time. Kadabadamish.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Colleagues, any questions or comments? Ms. Heffernan.
Yeah, I would like to thank you so very much for being here. My name's Lindsay Heffernan. I'm one of the school committee members. I appreciate your being with us because it's an opportunity for us to learn more and things for me to learn. And so I thank you for that. I think I know that I suffer, as do many, with a belief that, or an ingrained understanding, as misguided as it is, that the Native peoples are in another part of America, and that clearly that is not the case. And so you're reminding us of the history that's right here in our own community is certainly important. I'm wondering. Do you know, I'm really struck by, I have a prior history working in the juvenile justice system and certainly had heard much about residential schools for Native youth and that connection to the justice system itself. Do we know of examples? And I appreciate you, Ms. Wally, of having a clearer, greater understanding of this history than I do. Do we have evidence of some of that happening in the Massachusetts area, New England area? Thank you. You could speak more to that. I think it's an important piece of this.
I'll let Brittany go, and then I can somebody had just messaged me about that the other day, but go ahead, Brittany.
So, in order to easily understand, right, this, where the residential schools in New England, think about colonization and how it sweeps across the country.
Sure.
The Native communities that are alive today, that are local to you, survived first contact. Trade was going on about 100 years before any of the colonies existed in Massachusetts. Of course, Jamestown, which is not in Massachusetts, existed first, right? And very, very quickly, you're going to see that, they don't see Native people as people. They don't see anyone who doesn't practice life the way they practice as people. So you see these very inappropriate terms being used, and I will say it, they use words like savage, right? Anyone that doesn't practice life the way that they practice is a savage. How do we fix this? How do they fix this? They want to civilize us. So we don't necessarily have this residential school thing going on here because we predate that system. We have something even, I would say, less talked about, even though it happened right here. And I'm happy to just kind of go into that a little bit, but it is hard to keep it brief because, one, it is complex, it is nuanced, and it is my history. The people who lived through this lived enough and fought enough to make sure that I could be alive today. So it's very hard It's very emotional and it's taxing to try and make this compact. But I'm going to try because, of course, I've done this professionally a lot, got some thick skin. So what do we have here in New England? We have praying towns. We have praying towns. I will give you an example. Native people who are Nipmuc lived in an area called Nipnet. And this is a huge area in central Massachusetts. To the very southern parts of the now states above Massachusetts and the northern parts of Rhode Island and Connecticut. Native people were still moved around by colonists who were taking land, usually by force, by theft, even, now remember, colonists and Native people have a very different concept. Their ideas of normal are not the same. Very different concept of land occupation. So if it got to a point in some places where if colonists thought that the land was unkempt, the natives were not keeping the land well, that was a sign for them to then possess it, right? So this land theft is happening all over the place. A praying town is an area where, okay, this is where the natives are going to live now. You're going to live over here. And, of course, we have to remember in the 1630s, there was the Pequot Massacre, which is a horrible, horrible thing. Set precedents for a lot of the wars that continued on with Native people. By 1675, we have King Philip's War, Metacom's Rebellion, and as we go towards these tensions, towards this war, these praying towns are now places that you're not allowed to leave. Well, first of all, it may not have been the land that Native people were choosing to live on in the first place. It might be less fertile, it could be, just land that you're not going to go to naturally to live in a community. But if you can't leave it, you can't practice your food ways. You cannot gather, you cannot hunt, you cannot forage. You're going to starve, and people did. Now, another big part of these praying towns, where does the word praying come from? Well, this is something that I do. I want to be able to have Melissa especially speak on it too, because it affects your people just as much as mine. Missionaries, a missionary, John Eliot. It was John Eliot's idea to actually speed up this civilization and force assimilation of Native people by taking the King James Bible and translating it into the lingua franca of that day. So translating into the Algonquin language, because then all the Native people can understand it faster, they can become Christians faster and civilized faster, and they can then be assimilated into colonial society. And like colonization is, these people come here and they enforce their own rules on Native people in many different ways. So a residential school happens, as you have people moving to the West, you have this happening later in history, but this is a very early on thing here, these praying towns. And just to be very clear how detrimental these praying towns were, there was one very close by your community, which is Neshoba, and now it's present-day Littleton. And 58 Nipmuc people were brought over to what today is the Louisa May Alcott Orchard House in Concord. It's actually a building that was built mid-century, 1650s by colonist John Hoare. And these Native people lived with him because he wanted to not have them die. And the people of Concord sold them out to a captain, Captain Mosley. They marched them down to Charlestown, forced them out to Deer Island, which is a coastal island off of Boston, where they were left to die. That was our country's first death camp in the 1600s. So I hope that kind of fills your gap of history there a little bit. And I think that in order to give my colleagues some time too, that I should kind of wrap it up there. But that's something that I really believe needs to be taught.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Brittany. I mean, I don't have a ton to say. I just, the question was timely, as just last week I had a woman reach out to me And there were Wampanoag children that were residents of the Carlisle School specifically. And also what she had wrote, and I just sort of pulled it up here, she actually already located some of the Herring Pond Wampanoag members that were in this, what we call hospitals and almhouses. There's one specifically in Tewksbury, and the children are listed as wards of the state. And what we're finding is many of them are buried on the grounds of that hospital. So there's work being done now to identify some of these children and family members and possibly have some sort of a ceremony or something for them. So yes, to answer your question, yes, the residential schools were certainly Wampanoag and other tribes in the Commonwealth that did attend them.
Mrs. Fritz.
Hi, I'm Sandy Fritz, I'm one of the school committee members.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that yes, a lot of Native children were removed from their homes and sent out of state. Carlisle Indian School of Industry is the school that would have been local to this area. And if you want to see, my colleague, co-director at Okateo, produced a play that was performed recently, last week, called Freedom in Season. It was part of Howling at the Moon production. It was a cooperative of Okateo and Double Edge Theater. And Larry Spotted Crow Man was telling the story of his great-grandfather who was fighting in the Civil War, Patience Vickers. And while he was fighting for his freedom in the Civil War, along with his brothers and uncles, all six of his children were removed from their home to be put into residential school. Just for clarity, 1978 was when ICWA was passed. That's Indian Children Welfare Act. And that was the first time Indian families could say no to having their children removed for residential schooling. 1978. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Fritz.
Yep. Hi, Sandy Fritz, I'm one of the school committee members, and I want to thank you for speaking with us this evening. When we read the report from the ad hoc committee, we did see that they had tried to reach out to have some information from local Native American tribes, just to have a complete picture as we move forward with this decision. So I really appreciate the fact that you did agree to come speak with us tonight. I think it gives us that piece that we wanted and was missing from this discussion. So thank you very much.
Any further questions or comments? I'd like to echo Ms. Fritz's sentiments. I appreciate the time and the presentation tonight. Really appreciate the perspectives. And thank you for joining us at tonight's meeting. It's very helpful. Dr. Sawyer.
Thank you. I also want to thank Ms. Ferretti, Ms. Anderson, and Ms. Wally for sharing their perspectives up this evening. I do have one question before we wrap up, and I'm not sure, and we have some folks here who are ready to participate in a public hearing on this as well, and want to give them their opportunity soon. So I'm hoping to ask sort of one final question. In the work that the study group did, in the feedback it received from the community, there are some who are in favor of changing the nickname of our mascot from the Colonials to something different, but who proposed that a change to sort of honor the origins of the American government and the ideals enshrined in terms of things like liberty and freedom and those things that go with the American Revolution. The change in the name to something like Patriots would be acceptable, that the word colonials is what's troublesome to them. And listening to you this evening, I'm curious as to your perspective as to whether it's the name colonial itself or any mascot that would represent those who did settle here in Massachusetts and locally here in Shrewsbury, whether they were called colonials or patriots or Minutemen or revolutionaries or something else. Would that be equally of concern to you, or is it specifically the word colonial that you find troublesome?
I mean, I'll go first. I think mascots are a uniquely American phenomenon. Having been in Europe, they're not really there. And I know that some Americans have tried to go over and Americanize the football, soccer teams with mascots, and they won't have anything to do with it. So it's a unique thing here in America. Generally, I don't agree with having any human sort of being as a mascot. Although a patriot, I guess, would have had a little bit more of a choice rather than, part of direct colonization reference as a colonist is. I would think that you have a lot of other things to choose from, and if you would like to be representing America, maybe you should be the Eagles or something. Like I don't know. It's your community, and your community needs to come up with something, but I don't believe that humans should be part of the equation. We shouldn't be mascots.
I wanted to echo everything that Rhonda was saying, because I also think that when we start to choose humans as mascots, you get into all kinds of different situations, right? Is it a culture? Is it an ethnicity? Is it a gender? Who's represented in that image? And I think as well, like, there are endless ways. I truly mean there are endless ways for us to move forward. And I say, that with the inclusive us, all of us, present day people who are dealing with mascot issues. There's so many options. I always think about nature, because I would love to be, if I were on a basketball team, I'm quite short. I'd love to jump really high, If you want to go with a theme of being proud of where you are on the earth, look around you and see what's growing there, see what's living there. And I just wanted to make sure that I really just echo what Rhonda is saying, because it's so important, and it's really helpful, because then you can move forward and you have something that's not problematic, and you can focus back on the point, which is our kids and the community and the sport and the fun of it.
I think I really don't have to say much. I do love the New England Patriots, don't get me wrong, but I don't know, do we make it a human? There's, just as Brittany and Rhonda said, there's so many options. So think about it. It's your town, and I think you could come up with something really fantastic that would better suit Shrewsbury. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your attendance in tonight's meeting. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
On to the next item on our agenda, which is a public hearing on the Shrewsbury High School mascot. So colleagues, last week we had the report summary of the Shrewsbury High School mascot ad hoc study group. Group illustrates two options for the school's committee's consideration as a pathway forward: either change the Colonials nickname and mascot entirely, or to keep the Colonials nickname but update the presentation of the mascot. Tonight, the public has been invited to provide feedback to the committee and the administration regarding the possibility of this change and any action that the school committee may wish to take on this issue at next week's meeting. I do want to be clear about the intent for tonight's meeting. This is a public hearing, and there will be no action taken by the school committee tonight. Our role here is to listen to public comments. And then, as you recall, last week I did ask the speakers who are interested tonight to email me in advance just to gauge interest in this discussion. Clearly, there's quite a significant amount of interest. So welcome to all of you tonight. And before we open tonight's public hearing, I do want to review a few guidelines per School Committee Policy 123 regarding public participation in school committee meetings. Speakers will be provided up to 3 minutes to speak. I have a countdown clock here that I would have you view as you come up to that microphone. So Please be conscious of the time. Also request that you present your remarks in a very polite and respectful manner. Stay on topic as well. Tonight's discussion is around the mascot, as you know. Speakers must begin their remarks by stating their name and address. And we'll start with those that I received emails from in advance of tonight's meeting, and then open it up to anybody else that would like to speak on the topic. So with that said, I will open the public hearing. And just to be fair and out of respect for those that emailed, I'll go in order of the timestamp, which I've compiled prior to this meeting. So with that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Robert Solis to the microphone. And just please introduce yourself and your address.
Thank you. Robert Solis, current resident of Shrewsbury. I have 2 daughters currently enrolled. My oldest will be a freshman next year. First and foremost, thank you to the school committee and members of the study group for the substantial time and effort put forth in a thoughtful, respectful manner. It's been an open, transparent process, one we can all be proud of. I also believe the young students who petitioned for change are to be commended. They have sparked a meaningful conversation within the community and brought awareness and should be recognized as such. Now, with all that said, I've been actively following, engaged. I've kept an open mind, wanted to support our students, and was under the impression that this is what the students wanted and supported. Yet when the final report and results arrived last week, the anonymous survey of current students proves a significant majority feel strongly to keep the mascot. I also believe that that was acknowledged within the report. Additionally, the original change.org petitions themselves as well proved that. 3,900 plus signatures to keep the mascot versus 1,200 to change. The study group recommendations then provided arguments for 2 different options. Neither of the recommendations were aligned with the wishes of the majority in the students and community. Change entirely or keep the nickname Colonials. It was even acknowledged in the report decisions were not based on the majority rule, but rather equity value based. And a couple of the comments from the argument, Situate calls for a values-based recommendation as opposed to majority rules recommendation. There were further comments as well. Question of change was not based on the fact that the majority wants the change. Some other comments, not a popularity contest. Equity is not the same as equality. So I recognize this emotionally charged topic, and especially watching our friends as well and their input there. With the remaining time, I just want to say in conclusion, we just need to find a way to coexist and find some common ground. I can clearly see the sides on, each perspectives, but a large majority rule believes in keeping the mascot. And we're all entitled to our opinions in a respectful manner. Given this, I'm just going to conclude with, especially after the input there, I agree with Dr. Sawyer. How do we find a way to coexist without it being perceived as cancel culture and find a happy medium? I would agree then, patriots, revolutionaries, that we don't lose our American heritage or culture. Thank you.
Mr. Solis, thank you so much. Can you just state your address for the record? Just your address, your street address for the record?
My address?
Yes.
8 Sleepy Hollow Road, Shrewsbury, Mass.
Great. Thank you so much.
And thank you very much. The reason why we're here is because of our school system as well, raising our families, and we thank you all.
Thank you very much. Next on the list is Mr. Jim Scott.
Good evening.
And just your name and address to start, please.
Sure. One of the few normal-sized people. Jim Scott, 172 Crescent Street in Shrewsbury. Our country is dangerously divided. A great portion believes stuff that is just not true. stolen election, QAnon, critical race theory that apparently makes white kids feel bad. What the study group showed us is that a whole lot of people in Shrewsbury believe stuff that isn't true. This is not about an interpretation. It's about a deficit in education. And I am addressing you as educators, us. We fanned the flames for 6 months, we forgot to educate. In our sociological study of uninformed opinion, we forgot to grade the papers. Artemus Ward, a colonial, he fought the colonial British. You got the meaning wrong. Colonials and patriots the same? That's not right. Three-cornered hats, colonials? Sorry, you're wrong on 3. And how about colonial is not offensive? Well, let's show you that that's not right. The word colonial is not the same as colonialism. Your grade is dropping like an anchor. Education makes peace. Ignorance is not a political position. If we're responsible educators, we need to tell our students, sorry, you got that wrong. And that's not all. Sorry, we were wrong for having taught that false narrative, the history of white triumphalism, where other people apparently didn't matter. What we're saying now, they do matter, makes some people angry. Who's going to be brave enough to tell students and educators that they were wrong? The world is trying to heal from colonialism. Since World War II, many countries have won independence from colonial oppressors. That's what we should be teaching, deconstructing colonialism from those crimes of history to what people are now calling the colonization of the internet, colonizing you with a click. This may be a new idea to some, but we don't need a history. We do need a history curriculum now where Black history, women's history, Native American history, immigrant history, LGBTQ history, labor history are not asterisks. We should say, you know what, kids? Part of the responsibility for teaching you is taking responsibility for teaching ourselves. That's what makes Shrewsbury a great high school. We won't claim we never made mistakes, but the important thing is to learn from mistakes. We're learning with you and from you. So the name is gone, what now? What's next to make peace, bring us together? A forum to bring it all together, explain it all, and a contest that calls for new ideas, for a new name, and it's exciting. Maybe someone will come up with a prize. I will. Equality will not be a loss. It will not divide us. It will make peace. 5 seconds to go.
Thank you so much, Mr. Scott.
Thank you.
Next on the list is Ms. Ann Sheehy. Oh.
Oh, I can put it back. The rest of the world.
State your name and address to start.
I'm Ann Sheehy. I live at 38 Oregon. And I am a parent of students in Shrewsbury Public Schools. So I will acknowledge the Shrewsbury High School students who brought the petition to change the mascot forward to the school committee and the ad hoc committee, and then bravely fielded questions from a variety of stakeholders. Their poise and grace throughout the process has been admirable. Theirs has been an active demonstration of the SHS core value of collaboration and communication. I have heard the arguments for retaining the mascot, the anguish in community members' voices as they speak of losing the tradition behind the mascot, and the nickname is clear. They speak of the loss of history. However, a school mascot or nickname is not about memorializing. It is about creating a shared sense of community. Importantly, a changing community may require changing the mascot. The Shrewsbury community is changing, and everyone who currently lives in this community should feel a part of this place, whether they lived here their whole lives or moved in this morning. Some have said changing the mascot will be divisive. The current mascot is divisive. Otherwise, we would not be here. Reevaluating a mascot is not erasing history. The discussion has highlighted admirable aspects of colonial people who fought against oppression, their persistence, their courage, and a desire to be free. However, the discussion has also revealed the partial truths that we tell ourselves about this history. The American colonial period included dispossession of indigenous land, enslavement of both indigenous and African peoples, and violence against those peoples. We cannot escape this. A name that most certainly evokes this complete history cannot represent us. I understand the anxiety of being forgotten is profound, but take a moment to imagine being omitted altogether. Not only is discussion of violence against minority communities in events such as the Trail of Tears the Red Summer of 1919 and the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921 not commonplace? There are a few lessons in our history courses that center the experiences of people of color that were critical to our development as a country. What about the Gandhi-led Salt March of 1930 that modeled the power of nonviolent civil disobedience that would influence Martin Luther King a generation later? A mascot change will not fix anything as complex as the way we teach and represent history, but we can use it to communicate our commitment to inclusivity. Finally, I will highlight SPS's core value of equity. This dialogue is not just about people of color. It is about all of us enjoying a richer life experience because of diversity. No one will be diminished by becoming more inclusive. We will all rise together. In the mission statement of SPS is a powerful proclamation. The Shrewsbury High School community empowers students to become capable, caring, active contributors to the world in which they live. For some of our students, they risked a great deal to live that mission. I will end by expressing my deep admiration for them, and asking all of us, including myself, to think of the most joyful thing that we have done to date to promote equity and inclusion in our community.
Thank you very much. Next on the list is Joshua Choi. All right, Joshua, if you just state your name and the address, your address.
Hi, my name is Joshua Choi, and I also live at 38 Oregon Avenue. And I am a SHS alum, class of 2020. And so this whole debate has kind of been a deja vu for me, because I'm currently a student at the College of the Holy Cross. I was actually just in this situation with my college. Our student body rightfully identified that our mascot, the Crusader, as problematic for many of the same reasons as the colonial, the history of the Crusader. The Crusader's legacy is death, rape, and slaughter in the Middle East. The Muslim equivalent of the Crusader is the jihadist. Both were religious extremists that slaughtered civilians in the name of God. While they may have been considered righteous soldiers in the past, present knowledge of their true history shows that the current name is inappropriate. And naturally, so we had a petition to change this name. And this petition to change the name was met with resistance from Holy Cross alumni and administration. Alums who fondly remembered their years at Holy Cross could not see how damaging the name is to the current climate, and cited tradition as the main detriment to changing the name. Some even suggested that Holy Cross could change the meaning of Crusaders to reflect them more positively, focusing on their devotion to God while downplaying the atrocities they committed. You can already see the similarities. And at Holy Cross, tradition won out. Eventually, the student body can only do so much, and the Board of Trustees was the people who made the final decision. They struck it down. The administration compromised by removing the Crusader's lance as appeasement, thus distracting from the actual issue of the name. However, this did not solve the issue. Our student body continues to protest our mascot, and is going to take a lot longer and require a lot more effort to make this change as a result. That brings me to today. You all have a chance to succeed where my school failed. You are not a board of trustees stuck in an ivory tower and more concerned about profits instead of people. Holy Cross continues to show that it is stuck in the past by ignoring the pleas of its students, and it will take a monumental effort to really modernize my college. In contrast, Shrewsbury can show that it is truly dedicated to empowering students to become capable, caring, and active contributors to the world by making sure that our mascot does not alienate its students. This decision that you will eventually make is going to decisively show whether our community stands with our students in the present or the facade of the past. I'd like to use the remaining time to add on that our community is already beginning to change, but it is going to take a long time. For example, we have a building that was called Brooks Milady that is now called just Brooks because Milady had been a slave owner. It took a long time, but we are making progress. And so this issue of diversity and inclusion is not going away, but it will just take a lot more effort and blood, sweat, and tears from the progressives to make it happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay. Wow, you guys are good at the time. Next on my list is Mr. Nick Tedisco. You just state your name and address, please. Thank you.
My name is Nick Tedisco. I live at 2 Kenneth Circle in Shrewsbury, and I'm here to represent my fellow colleagues that are what we call alumni from Shrewsbury High School for the past 50-some-odd years. being in a difficult position because I'm at the forefront a lot with the athletic program in Shrewsbury, doing the broadcasting, saying the word colonial about 40 times during our broadcasts over the course of the past 20 some odd years. People have looked to me for my opinion on this whole thing. Being a graduate of 1973 at Shrewsbury High School, I've been a colonial for a long time, personally. When I look at the seal of the town of Shrewsbury over your heads over there, I see a colonial village that with the church, in the center of town, the Congregational Church, which was founded, the first minister was Captain Job Cushing, who was the first minister. He also fought at the Battle of Lexington and conquered. He was a colonial. So do we change the seal of the town of Shrewsbury? I think of Shrewsbury as the colonials when I see it. And it's just my humble opinion. If I were to have the time to present, such as the people that presented tonight, and by the way, I'm in my own history, even though my last name is Tedesco, which is Italian, my mother was Hersey, and in her blood, we had an Abernathy in my family. So I am very sensitive to the needs of both sides and very respectful to both sides as well. But I don't know. I guess I need to just say that I'm for the keeping of the colonial. I've never thought of it as a racist element in any manner. And if I could present like the people that did earlier, I would just show faces of all the people that were in the yearbooks from Shrewsbury High School over the past 50 years that were very proud of calling themselves Shrewsbury Colonials. All my yearbooks all say Colonial in them. And my high school class ring had Colonial on it. And I guess that's all I got to say. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Okay, that concludes my list. I'd like to welcome anybody here in attendance tonight that hasn't spoke to come to the microphone. Yes, Ms. O'Connor. Just state your name and address, please.
Hi, I'm Donna O'Connor, 16 Bunker Hill Road, Precinct 2. Of course, I shouldn't have touched it, right?
That's okay.
It's the mix-up. I just want attention, that's all. So, the reason I'm here tonight is because I firmly believe you have to stand up for what you believe and let your voice be heard. I know there's many people watching this at home. They'll be watching it on YouTube because there's so much interest in this and so much concern. And the concern is this. I graduated in the class of 1970, which is 51 years ago, and we were colonials. We were proud to be colonials. We're still proud to be colonials. I believe that based on a lot of what we've heard tonight, maybe there needs to be a review of what's taught in history class, but I don't believe that the word colonial should be taken as a derogatory word or meaning. Many of the people that I went to school with have called me, texted me, emailed me to ask my opinion, to express their opinions. And they're around the country, and they're very concerned that somebody wants to change the name from Shrewsbury High School Colonials to something else, because we believe we are colonials. Now, I also want to say that my mother died at the end of February, and right away we knew that my mother wanted donations to go to Shrewsbury High School boosters. I don't believe that a lot of the boosters that donated would have been so generous had they learned that the name of Colonials was taken from our identity, and that's who we are. We live in Massachusetts. So for whatever was good or bad or ugly that's happened, this is who we are, and we're here. And so that's all I have to say, and thank you. And the other one thing, I have a few more seconds. I just wanted to say the commitment and the time that the school committee members put in for all of what has to happen to make our school system better. I congratulate you and I thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Anyone else like to speak? Yes, sir. If you just state your name and address for us, please.
My name is John Tyndall. I live at 1 Birchwood Drive. I was born in Shrewsbury. I've lived in Shrewsbury for many years. I was in the class of 1971. I question how many on the school committee have lived in town all their life. I wonder if, like Donna said, I'm a colonial. I've always been. My class of 71 was very, very happy as being a colonial. We have nothing to do with what happened years past. I have a neighbor at the Cape who's a Nipmuc Indian, and we listened to her, and they went through a lot. And the presentation that was here tonight, I have listened to her say many of the same things on things that have happened. It's not something that happened here in Shrewsbury. We are the colonials, and I don't think that the school committee should change the mascot to whatever. If we do that, then St. John's would probably have to change from the Pioneers. Maybe they shouldn't be the Pioneers. Maybe the Civil War monument in the center of town should be taken down, because we shouldn't have had the Civil War or the World War II or the World War I monuments. None of us wanted to have that, but I strongly urge we should keep the colonial.
Thank you, Mr. Tyndall. Okay. Anybody else like to speak regarding the mascot? Okay, yeah, sure.
I'm not a very good speaker, I'm very shy.
That's okay. We won't bite.
And I had this, I sent this, I just, out from my heart. My name is Skip Anderson, and I'm from Dewey Road in Shrewsbury. And thank you for listening to me. I don't have my glasses, I hope I can get through this. This is what I wrote. Dear Mr. Colonial, my name is Skip Anderson, and though we have never met, I feel somehow we are good friends. We met in 1967 along with a lot of my friends. We do not know each other very well at this time, but somehow I felt you were going to be a big part of my life, and you were. I knew that you represented the kids of Shrewsbury, Mass. Some were new and some were old. From all parts of our small little town, some of us were a little scared, but some of us were a little bit nervous. But one thing for sure, we all were in it together, and it was a big step. You opened your arms and welcomed us all, never judging any of us, none of us judging you. You are now friends for life. As far as I was concerned, that is how I see you, and that's how I'll always see you. Now that there's a movement going around to say that we can no longer be friends because of something that happened over 100 years ago. Some good, some not so good, but either way, it's history. I do not believe that a group of people sat down one day to create a school emblem that would stir up so much controversy some 40-plus years later. This emblem of colonial represents Shrewsbury. The late, well-known Worcester sports cartoonist Al Banks, who designed it. In the late 1950s, when SHS was located on Oak Street, the colonial was incorporated as the new school seal. This seal was used immediately by being placed on the class ring by Sue Donahue, SHS, class of 1966. The design by Judy Donahue, class of 68, with our seal incorporated as a log and a circle to signify our global SHS alumni community. Please do not say that I can no longer be friends with a colonial. To the people who are trying to remove the colonial mascot, I beg you to reconsider what might be really doing by this act. We are the other side of the issue and not the bad guys. But trust me when I say this to say that the SHS alumni, are not going down without a fight. So please think long and hard about what you are trying to accomplish. And as we are the Colonials, and we could not be prouder. Skip Anderson, class of 1970. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anderson. Okay. Would anybody else like to speak? Yes, ma'am. State your name and address, please.
I'm not a speaker either. My name is Diane Kraus. I live at 8 Rucliffe Street in Shrewsbury. I just want to say I'm a firm believer that we should keep the mascot, the Colonials. I noticed there wasn't even an option to keep everything just the way it was. It was to update it, or it was to change it. I propose that we just keep it the way it is. I graduated in 1969. It means so much. It means so much to so many people. And yes, maybe changing some of the history that we teach our students so that they know what's happening. But I'm proud to be a Colonial. I'm proud of this community. This community has stood by me and my family for so many years. For when Spags was alive, and he gave all the helped with the funerals and the pastries and things like that. We're all Colonials, so please, please don't change history. History is always going to be history, but it seems like we're taking up and just wiping history out. Let us not. Let us please keep the Colonials. I beg you from my heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kraus. Would anybody else like to speak at the public hearing regarding the Colonial mascot? Yes. And name and address,
Hi,
please.
Kathy Benici, 44 Brookway Drive, Shrewsbury. I'm not a speaker either. But what I do want to ask is, you've already heard from many of the people that I'm with tonight. And my question is, who's going to pay for this change? Is this going to come out of the new budget that was just appropriated with the vote in May? Like, where is the money coming from to do this? Because many of us can't afford to put up more money in this town. We pay taxes. Nobody has mentioned money. Are they going to have fundraisers? Like, I think all of us need to know where the money's coming from to make any kind of change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Benici. Okay, would anybody like to speak any further on the mascot? Okay, there being no one else, I will close the public hearing, but I want to thank you all, first off, for your patience and waiting. I know it was a little later than we expected, but also for your respect of each other and for the time as well. You're all very good in terms of timing, so thank you so much for your attendance tonight and for your comments. And I'm going to move on to the next item of the agenda. We're not going to be insulted if you'd like to leave. We're used to it, so it's okay. But thank you so much for your attendance tonight. Appreciate it. Okay. All right, the next item on our agenda is also, actually is under Finance and Operations. It is fiscal year '22 non-representative staff compensation adjustment. Colleagues, after compensation freeze for the past year, changes in compensation rates for the coming fiscal year for non-represented staff, secretaries, clerical support, and IT staff. Support are recommended. A memo from Dr. Sawyer detailing the rate changes is enclosed along with the rate. Here to present is Mr. Collins and Ms. Malone.
I'll actually take this, Mr. Wensky.
Dr. Sawyer.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. Just to briefly summarize the memo in your packet, each year we recommend an adjustment for the non-represented, which are essentially the staff we have that are not part of a union or collective bargaining unit. This includes secretaries, clerical administrative support staff, information technology support staff, our extended school care program staff, and any other hourly workers who are not represented by a collective bargaining unit. Just want to remind those listening that because of the budget crisis that we did face a year ago when the budget was set, the recommendation for this group of employees was for a total compensation freeze for this year, which is fiscal year 2021 or the 2020-21 school year. School committee agreed to that, and as a result, all of these employees went without any typical cost of living adjustment or any step increases, which helped the district avoid even more job cuts that would have had to take place in order to balance the budget. And I certainly know the school committee does, and I deeply appreciate the sacrifice that these employees made, especially given their level of compensation. So, there was no way that would be recovering, the typical pay increase. It won't be regained in terms of what they would have received as a raise this year under normal circumstances. That said, I believe the fair thing to do in the coming fiscal year is to adjust these compensation rates to the level that they would have been next year if a typical cost of living increase had been provided both this past year as well as going forward into next year. That will also guard against having this employee group fall behind the market, and we are becoming even more competitive just generally relative to filling positions, just given the state of the economy at the moment. So it's important that the school district is able to attract and retain qualified and talented staff members in what are these very important roles. So as a result, the proposed rate sheet that is in your packet represents the rates that most employees would have been at next year if they'd received a typical 2% COLA this past year, and then another 2% cost of living adjustment for the coming year. That represents a net 4% increase in the hourly rates. That's for all categories other than extended school care providers. They're recommended to be adjusted by 3% overall, which is an ongoing strategy to create some more internal equity with the other roles in this group. So again, while these employees will not recover the additional pay they would have received this year, but did not because of the compensation freeze, this proposed adjustment will avoid the issue of having their compensation trailing behind where it would have been next year due to the sacrifice that they made this year. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have, and that is a recommendation for the compensation adjustment for this employee group for fiscal year 2022.
Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. Colleagues, any comments or questions? Ms. Fritz?
I think, well-deserved, hardworking employees, especially this year. But I think the other thing that's really important with market, we never want to get too far behind, because when you do, it just becomes that much harder in the budget to make it up. So I fully support this.
Any further comments or questions? I agree with Ms. Fritz. I do support this recommendation. Very important that these roles remain in market and we stay competitive. Thank you very much. This does require a committee vote. Can I have a motion to approve compensation for non-represented staff for FY22 as presented?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll, all those in favor, please say
Aye.
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 Motion carries unanimously. Thank you so much. Okay, next item on the agenda is approval of minutes from our meeting on June 9th, 2021. Colleagues, any revisions or corrections? There being none, they will be approved as written. Finally, tonight, we do need to adjourn into executive session for the purpose of addressing Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Sections 21A7, to comply with or act under the authority of any general or special law or federal grant-in-aid requirements. Purpose 7, Open Meeting Law, Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Sections 22F and G, for the purpose of reviewing, approving, and/or releasing executive session minutes. And B, for the purpose of addressing Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares. Purpose 3, the Shrewsbury Education Association, Units A and/or B, the Shrewsbury Paraprofessional Association, and/or the Cafeteria Workers Association. And C, for the purpose of addressing Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A2, to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, or to conduct collective bargaining sessions or contract negotiations with non-union personnel. Purpose 2, non-represented administrators. May I have a motion to adjourn into executive session?
So moved. Second.
Could you just, one quickly thing, just please note that it also includes the superintendent of schools. And if you could also just include the language that we return to open session only for the purpose of adjourning.
I amend my motion
Thank you.
to that purpose.
I second his amendment.
Okay, great, moved and seconded, thank you very much. Roll call vote is required. Mr. Palich?
Aye.
Dr. McGee?
Aye.
Ms. Heffernan?
Aye.
Ms. Fritz?
Aye.
Myself, aye, thank you, and good night.